Hello all. I heard one of my colleagues say it's time, so I think we should probably get started. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to try to project. I've got this voice modulation thing. I think I'm soft-spoken if you know me. So it sounds like I'm angry when I speak loud. I'm sorry if that's confusing. I'm not angry. I'm very happy. Very happy to have you here with us. And we're certainly thrilled to have you here as we welcome to Chattanooga and to UTC, Diane Merrick visiting artist Amy Elkins. Tonight, Elkins will be discussing her artistic practice. We'll see a lot of her work here in slide form, talking about her thought and her process. Afterwards, we will open her exhibition in the Crest Gallery, Black is the Day, Black is the Night. I think I have it right. So hopefully you can join us for that after the lecture. During her visit, she's been here with us for a few days now. Amy assisted in the installation of the exhibition. She has met with members of the Chattanooga arts community. She's been making presentations on her process, on professionalism, and tomorrow we'll wrap up with some studio visits with our upper division BFA students. So it's really quite an undertaking having a visiting artist, having a Diane Merrick visiting artist on campus, and all of this is really possible thanks to, of course, the generosity of the artist, the hard work of our director and curator, Ruth Grover, the support of the Merrick family, and of course, the vision of Diane Merrick. So if we could just give everyone. Thanks, Ruth. I'd also like to take a moment. I see some friends of the gallery in the audience, so I'd like to acknowledge our friends. Donations from the friends make the exhibition in the Crest Gallery possible. And it's really this coupling of a meaningful visit by the Diane Merrick visiting artist and a corresponding exhibition in the Crest Gallery that makes this series special and really contributes so substantially to student learning. So to those friends of the gallery and the audience, thank you. Yeah, so if we could just thank the friends of the gallery. And I think Ruth is always fond of saying no donation is too small. So if you're interested in becoming a friend of the gallery, please do get in touch with us. Let us know. Really, it makes really wonderful things possible. So, of course, I'd like to thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn the floor over to Ruth Grover, and she will introduce Amy Elkins. So have a great time this evening.
Thank you, Ron. Of course, as an academic gallery, the Crest's mission is different than other venues, museums perhaps, or nonprofit galleries. As an academic gallery, we want to emphasize dialogue and discussion through the exposure to the type of art we have within the Crest. And dialogue is essential to the mission of an academic gallery. And of course, I've been reminded very much of the importance of research to academia and research in association with the making of art, the practice of art making, especially with Amy's show, because she is a very involved researcher. And I've also been really struck with this visit about the importance of Diane's vision of bringing the artists in alongside an exhibition of their work in the gallery, and how meaningful that has become. Because for this particular visit, the weather turned everything around. So the lecture is the last of her events, and she's already had the professionalism and the process of materials. And while I've been looking at her work and talking to her for months and months, having her here today, talking to the students about her work and about her practice, has enlightened me and added to my understanding of what she does. So having the artist along with the work is a tremendous gift. I think, for the Crest Gallery and for the campus in Chattanooga. Of course, Amy's a photographer whose practice focuses on fine arts portraiture. She has several projects, completed several projects going right now. What we're showing in the Crest are just two of those many projects, Black as a Day, Black as a Night, and alongside Parting Words. She was born in Venice, California, and is currently based in the greater Los Angeles area. She received her BFA in photography from the School of Visual Arts in New York City. She's been exhibited and published both nationally and internationally, including at the Kunsthalle Wien in Vienna, Austria. I just glided right over that, didn't I? The Center for Creative Photography, Tucson, the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, North Carolina Museum of Art, Lightwork Gallery, Syracuse, New York, Aperture Gallery, and Yancey Richardson Gallery in New York City. The Soto Gallery in Los Angeles, and the Houston Center of Photography in Houston, Texas. She's been awarded the Lightwork Artist in Residence Prize and the Latitude Artist in Residence Prize, both in 2014, 2011, well, somewhere in there. Residence in Munich, Germany, the Aperture Prize and the Latitude Artist in Residence Prize in 2014. And the Aperture Prize, the Portfolio Prize, is really a major achievement. She engages in active commission practice and as a photographer, and recently finished a photo project on artist Ed Richet for the Financial Times Weekend magazine. Let's welcome Amy here tonight. Amy, you have the floor.
Hello. Thank you all for having me, flying me out. I've had a great time. I fly out tomorrow. It's gone quick. Already been about 8. Today's my 8th night here, I think. Can you guys hear me all right? Because we fumbled with the mic back and forth. So normally, I'm always making a lot of work at the same time. It's the way my brain functions best. It's not necessarily the best way to present my work, and I've learned that over the years with different presentations I've done. And so due to not wanting to completely overwhelm you guys, and due to what is in the gallery and how complex and how much conversation can go just into that body of work, I'm going to focus just on the 2 projects in the gallery. And I'm going to show Black as the Day, Black as the Night first, and gauge if you guys have any questions or things you want to pause on, and then move into Parting Words. And I'm hoping that the projection looks great for you guys. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about a little bit, that I've been thinking about a lot, is this idea that prison culture and the criminal justice system has been sort of way more in the spotlight than I feel like it has been in the past. It's become part of mainstream culture. It's become some of the most popular television shows that are out there. It's really creating an open dialogue that that I'm kind of excited that in a way I'm not hands-on connecting with. Like, I don't know the people that made those shows. I'm not in touch with them, but I like that my work can play into this larger dialogue talking about these topics. And so that's what I wanted to focus my lecture on, was sort of this idea of popular culture and how it can affect us all. So in the past few years, we've been seeing and hearing a lot about prisons and the criminal justice system in mainstream culture. Some of the most compelling and popular TV shows and podcasts out there right now are focusing their attention on the issues. This is exciting to me personally because it's bringing a lot of attention to topics, sorry, I fumble with my chair, that might otherwise fall far below the radar for a lot of people, and it's engaging people to talk and think about what I feel are some pretty challenging subjects. So For instance, Orange is the New Black. It's an extremely popular television show. It's actually based off of a true story. And while the show has all this comedic moments, it at the same time is really digging into the personal lives of each of the women in the show. And it really hones in on these bleak realities about the corruption and shortcomings that happen within the US prison system, including what happens when a prison becomes for profit or privatized. When that last season came out, that really made a strong impact on me, seeing how this show was digging at these. It's a very serious topic. It's sort of in the media, but the fact that the show brought it up, I thought was pretty powerful, because they've got such a large audience. It's on Netflix. Most people can watch it. It appeals to a lot of different, it appeals to a lot of ages across the gender spectrum. Also, a show that I've been really enjoying is HBO's late night series, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. He's been really taking some hardcore stabs at like pretty hard prison topics. He's been talking about mandatory minimums, solitary confinement, the death penalty, and a lot of other things. And I think his use of satire, which is mixed with actual like real news and real politics, is something that's really powerful. It makes people super uncomfortable and cringe, but it makes us laugh because he's a pretty funny guy. The Netflix docuseries Making a Murderer, it was only released a few months back, I think in December, and it gained so much popularity and brought so much attention to the case of Stephen Avery, a man that served 18 years in prison for a wrongful sexual assault conviction at 85, only to be convicted a few years later for the murder of Teresa Halbach, that it triggered multiple petitions to the White House on change.org. There's hundreds of thousands of people around the world in a few months that are interested in this guy's case and are wanting his case to be reopened and or just have him and his nephew freed altogether. So that right there shows how popular media can affect people and bring about an awareness. And I think what's interesting about Making a Murderer is that you think if it happened to this guy, it's probably happened to a lot of people. We just don't know about it. So there's something really fascinating about that to me. There's a show called Rectify on Sundance. It's been a really powerful show that I've been watching. It's not as well known. It's kind of harder to watch. But it's a show that's about to enter its 4th season, and it follows the life of a man named Daniel Holden, who was imprisoned as a teenager for the murder of his 16-year-old girlfriend. He spent 19 years on death row before DNA evidence was looked at, and it led to his release. And so the show just really explores how crime can affect small communities and how people turn on each other. And it really questions, like how does someone that's been convicted for 19 years ever get his life back, get any of those years back? And it's a pretty complicated show. It kind of weaves you through this narrative where you're constantly questioning what might have happened. The podcast Serial, the high school student Adnan Syed was convicted and sentenced to life for the murder in 1999 of his 18-year-old girlfriend, Haley. It shows like major flaws in the investigation and trial surrounding his case, including the fact that there was no real evidence found against him. There was no DNA testing done. There was an alibi that wasn't brought to the stands, and the only real evidence they had was that they had this key witness who kept changing his story, literally said that he committed part of the crime and walked away with no jail time. So these are all shows that I've been really fascinated in after making my work and being able to really reflect and look at this and see how it's affecting people that are watching. And I suppose I can hit play so you guys have something to look at too. It's really affecting people. People talk about it. You know, like you go to get your oil change, people talking about it in the lobby, you go to the doctor's office, people are just talking about a lot of this stuff. And to me, I think that's crucial, and that's what I kind of hope my work is doing. There was also a few documentaries, I don't know if any of you saw them. One, they're both PBS Frontline. One is called Prison State, which is looking into prison reform. And it's talking a lot about juvenile offenders and those with mental disease or addiction problems. And then there's Solitary Nation, which looks specifically into the psychological and emotional breakdowns that occur with people when they're in long-term solitary confinement. So that's just a few. There's a lot of other things out there that are talking about these things. And then it's also in the news a lot. You know, it's been in a lot of mainstream culture, but it's also solitary confinement and the new lethal injection cocktails are being talked a lot about. It's kind of a controversial subject matter. And then the Supreme Court just recently cracked down on Florida's death penalty laws, which made Delaware sort of look at that and say, our laws are very similar, we should shut ours down now, for right now too. And then Obama, over the summer, was the first sitting president to visit a federal prison, and he actually sat with inmates, and he did so in his push for prison reform. And in fact, a couple weeks ago, he announced his ban on solitary confinement for juvenile offenders, and he also he banned it for adults who committed minor infractions, and overall is trying to limit the use of it at all. So there's not really a whole lot of denying how much attention these topics are getting, and I think it's a really powerful thing. Because it's not content that just like you or I have, it's content that anyone with an internet connection and anyone with a TV can get into. And I've thought a lot about that, and I've heard a lot of debates about the idea that these things are sort of glorifying or glamorizing or popularizing crime and prison culture. But to me, in a lot of ways, it's also humanizing it. And so while incorporating these kind of topics into mainstream culture, it's just creating a bigger reach. It's creating more to talk about for people that might have like little or no knowledge on the subjects. And I think it's cool that it's providing an alternative source to mainstream news and just believing what you're fed on the news. And I think that awareness potentially leads to conversation, which potentially leads to change. And I believe that art has that power too, and that as an artist, we all have the capacity, or some might even say the responsibility, to share untold stories through a platform that makes the world with all of its complex, complexities and darkness just far more palatable, and we create room for conversation. So that's what I'm hoping that my work does. When I first started my series, Black is the Day, Black is the Night, it was 2009, and it wasn't triggered by even really knowing anything about these topics, about capital punishment or about solitary confinement. I actually had to learn a lot of that on the way. It wasn't brought about by watching popular TV or movies either. It just wasn't on my mind. And, like most of my projects, this project sort of came about rather organically. And then once it started, I constantly started digging into looking and researching and finding as much information as I could. I watched a lot of movies. I watched Capote, I watched Bronson, I watched Dead Man Walking, I watched Life of David Gale. I watched documentaries like Into the Abyss or Last Supper or At the Death House Door. And And I got completely lost and immersed in Norman Mailer's Executioner's Song. It's a really, really compelling book. It's just like over 1,000 pages though, so it's not exactly like a light reading material to carry around in your book bag. But I did. I lived in New York and I actually carried it with me back and forth on the subway all the time. And then I would go down at the Strand in New York to the basement. They had their criminal justice and capital punishment kind of section down there, and I would just thumb around and get lost in those books. And then, of course, once this project started rolling, I started reading and writing a tremendous amount of letters with the individuals in the project. So how did it start? It was triggered by a long-distance phone call. I was living in New York City at the time. My mom was living in California. She phoned one afternoon in the summer of 2009 to tell me that she had located her estranged brother that her and her relatives have been searching for years. And she had found him on this prison database in Oklahoma. Unfortunately, by the time she had found him, he had already been released. No one knew where he was all over again. And but we spoke on the phone about that, and she was really sad. It's her youngest brother. She comes from a family of 7. Her mom, my grandma, always had a tremendous amount of guilt about what they all did to lead him to disappear. And it turns out nothing. He just kind of fell apart and needed to be by himself for a while. But while we spoke, I quickly looked him up as well. And without much difficulty, his image was just staring at me, preserved by the ODOC. And so I just was staring at him. We hung up the phone, and I sat there looking at him, and he looked a lot older than the last time I had seen him. His eyes weren't even making contact with the camera. And as a portrait photographer, I became really struck and charged about that idea of the mugshot as a portrait. And I thought that's probably one of the most charged and confrontational portraits one could ever have made of themselves. And most likely in a very heightened state of distress or just upset. So we hung up, and I'm staring at this picture, and then I instantly, my brain does what it does, and it just got kind of obsessive. So I just quickly was looking around online, trying to find any database that might exist where there would be lots of mugshots. And while I was doing that, I stumbled across a website that hosted just thousands of inmates seeking pen pals. And it struck me. I've never seen anything like this in my life. I didn't know it existed. I'd probably heard of it at some point, but it didn't resonate. And there was something just really striking about that idea of like a message in a bottle, throw it out there if anyone's going to respond. And there was different ways I could navigate the website. So I could click a box to search only for those who were sentenced to life or to death. Those were the most extreme search methods I could do. I could also search for state or individual prisons or race or horoscope or any number of odd combinations, but I clicked the death row button just to see what would happen, and I thought maybe there would be I don't know what I thought. I thought there'd be maybe a page of people, that there couldn't be more. And so I clicked, and there was just tons of people that just poured on, page after page after page. There must have been I don't even know, 50 pages, and each page had, and they're all just staring back at you. They're mugshots. So my darker side kind of surfaced, and I found myself just coming back to this site again and again and again. And I just was really conflicted about how to feel. And I was reading all these profiles of all of these men who, a lot of them had lived over half of their lives on death row or in secure housing units, solitary confinement. And some that I had found were serving long-term or infinite sentences for crimes committed as teenagers. So at the time I knew that capital punishment existed, but I didn't really think about it until that day. And I was reading all these profiles of all of these men who spent an average of 22 and a half hours a day in solitary confinement cells, roughly 6 by 9 feet. So not only were they facing their mortality, but they were doing so in isolation. And I wondered how that would just affect them, how that would impact their notion of reality, their notion of self, their memories outside the environment they were in. I wondered if they embraced that mind of a dreamer and kind of got lost in daydream, or if they became thinkers and dug into like studies, a lot of them did, or if they just kind of let go and let their environments just deteriorate them. And so it took me months to know how I wanted to proceed. I visited the site a lot. I had a lot of conversations with my friends that thought I was completely out of my mind. And eventually I set up a P.O. box, and I sent letters to several men, 5 serving death row sentences for capital murder charges, and 2 serving life sentences for non-homicide related offenses that had gone in at 13 and 15 years old. And within weeks, their letters started coming back to me. And through it, we created this collaboration that unfolded and went on for years in this really unpredictable fashion. So between 2009 and 2014, we would write and share stories regarding our very different day-to-day lives. I would tell them about New York and my travels, and I would send copies of photographs and projects I was working on. I would Xerox parts of my favorite books or poems. I would describe scenes out of my favorite movies. And in return, they would describe memories, often decades removed, of growing up in Mexico or California or New York, the Midwest or the South. And they told me of the forests that they would run off into as children, and the rivers they wished they could be baptized in, and the open skies they longed to lay under, and the violent seas whose waves crashed and shook before them. They told me of the open desert roads that led to their arrest, of the trees that held sacred meaning to them, and of the caves they would often explore in their youth, all of which seemed loaded with symbolism and metaphor to me, given their current and confining predicaments. I posed a lot of questions to them regarding self-identity and memory and dreams and homesickness. I asked them to describe childhood refuges and landscapes and teenage stomping grounds and spiritual upbringings. I asked them about their families and about the dynamics of their households growing up. I asked them what books they read or wished they could read, what their most prized possessions were, what they were learning, how they were exercising, how often they were able to speak to or be near others. I asked them about their daily routines and the food they ate, the uniforms they wore, and the time outside of their prison cells that they were permitted. Some described the crimes they had committed, some declared and maintained their innocence, and some seemed wildly sporadic with the ups and downs associated with being placed in long-term solitary confinement. 2 shared their experiences with facing their own executions as the dates grew nearer and their last appeals were lost. 1 sent a farewell letter that arrived several days after his death, and my last letter to him came back with the word deceased scrawled on it in handwriting next to the return to sender stamp. There were times throughout the project that it all just got too heavy, too much, and I just kind of went into self-preservation mode. I would continue to write, but I just got kind of depressed, and I didn't always want to make work. And sometimes I was a bad pen pal. Sometimes I fell short on responding as quickly as I could have because it was a bit much for me. So when there was these moments of creative dryness, I really wondered, like, what did I get myself into? And where is this going to lead? Like, how am I going to ever find a closure to this project? And how long can I actually maintain it? But while I did maintain it, it went on from 2009 to 2014, and I constructed these landscapes and these portraits out of our correspondence. And I used formulas that were specific to each of them and each of their described memories, their age, and their years incarcerated. Excuse me, I need to have a little quick drink. And it was through the formulas that I created that I was really driving at how to talk about identity loss and memory collapse. And the formulas that I used made their portraits less recognizable the longer they were in prison. And it made their memories that they were describing more and more muddled the longer their sentences spanned on. None of this could help but mutate. So I was making this work, but it also left me with a lot of questions. And so I would go out and I would gather things from the book bins at the Strand, and I would kind of make things that they were describing to me, like jump ropes or paint palettes or I can't remember, lots of different things they would tell me about. And I photographed all the things that I was making, and I sent them to them, and they would critique them sometimes. Not all of them were into it, but some of them would critique the images and talk to me about what it meant to them. And one of them went as far as to put all of the different sky images up in his cell. And it was a cell that he had already told me that he had stopped decorating years prior because all of the work he kept putting on the wall was getting torn down during their daily shakedowns. So he was losing things that were personal to him, so he stopped trying. And he told me that the images of the sky that I sent him gave him a window outside, and that gave him a huge sense of hope. And so that was really something interesting to me as an artist, to see how my work would affect people that I was working with, because I honestly didn't know if they were going to hate it or wonder what I was doing. And so this is all the work that I have to show for it. It's a ton. The show here is just a little fraction of it. But to me, it's a collection of these sort of the idea of the unreal mixed with really brutal truths. There's prison interiors that are both tangible objects of the old-fashioned letters, or they're coming out of described imaginations from these men, sort of these lush, fantastical landscapes that were illustrated by their shared imaginations. I used quotes from poems that they wrote. I scanned letters or photographed letters and postcards and evidence of prison screening and censorship. There was a lot of that. And I compiled lists of all this stuff. And then there was these like somber holiday cards I would get as well. And so I had all this material, and this is the story I was able to piece together. And I think about it a lot, because I think most people will never have to comprehend the extreme, such an extreme reality, or feel such profound isolation in their lifetime. And that's a pretty profound thing to me. Of the men I originally wrote with, there were 7. One was released in 2010 after spending 15 years in prison. He went in at 15. He was released at 30 for a non-homicide related offense. In Idaho, there's a law of parties, so he was with someone that killed someone, and at the age of 15 they gave him life, but luckily they kind of thought about it and overturned it. He was released 15 years later. 3 of the men that I wrote with, they eventually opted to move away from the project in terms of just kind of moving on, not wanting to maintain it anymore. One of the men that I wrote with was executed in 2009 after spending 12 years on death row, and one was executed in 2012 after spending 15 years on death row. Both of them maintained their innocence throughout their sentences and never wavered in that. I honestly never took a side, but I feel like if there's a little bit of doubt, there's probably a little reason to maybe look into it. And I think in both cases there was quite a bit of doubt. And then recently, this is the little light at the end of the tunnel. In 2015, one of the men that I wrote with the longest, he went into juvenile hall at 13. At the age of 16, he tried to escape. He was apprehended immediately. He was tried as an adult. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and they sent him to Pelican Bay, which is one of the more maximum security prisons in the country. They deemed him gang affiliated and escape risk, and they put him in solitary confinement, and he was there for 17 years. He was there for a total of 22 years. 17 of them were spent in solitary confinement. But the Supreme Court recently ruled that solitary confinement for juvenile offenders and sentencing juveniles to life without the possibility of parole for non-homicide offenses without the opportunity for review was unconstitutional. And so his case was opened and they let him free. So he had been in prison from 13 to 36, 37 years old, and then the step-down program was from total isolation to maybe, I think it was a couple weeks in general population, and then he was let out. So the exhibition here at Cress shows work surrounding 5 of the 7 men, 4 of which served death row sentences, 2 were executed throughout the project, and then 1 was released, as I just mentioned, after serving 22 years in prison. So the space was super limiting in terms of how large the scope of this project is. And I really hope that one day I get to show it in its entirety. But for now, this is actually the largest installation I've been able to have and the most dynamic in terms of different components that are in there. There's a little bit of some mixed media stuff. There's some 3-dimensional, there's objects in there. I never have been able to incorporate objects into a photography exhibition, so that's super exciting to me. So I am working on a book right now of the work. I got a grant, the Peter S. Reed Foundation grant, to publish a book, so I'm working on that, and I think that will probably be the largest scope of the work and the easiest way to go through it. Also, the idea that it's a tangible object is super important to me, the idea that you can return to it like you could with a physical letter. So that should be coming out later this year. And on the topic of books, because I did a really poor job of announcing this way in advance, because I was scrambling to get out here, but part of what I wanted to do to make this show feel connected to Tennessee at all, and for people here, is like, how do I, like, why, I mean, sure, these are really harsh, universal things we're looking at, but they're not your prisons, and so I wanted to try and make it a little bit more personal. So the way that I figured might be the best way was within part of the exhibition. There's a prison cell built in the exhibition. And I've contacted the Appalachian Prison Book Project and spoken with them. And so something that I am hoping unfolds here is that visitors to the gallery can bring books. There's lists around the gallery, and I think we're trying to put them around a little bit outside of the gallery as well, that has, it's a list of the most basically requested books. So the way that the organization works is it's a nonprofit. They send free books to men and women in the Appalachian states, and they're one of the only organizations that I could find that wasn't specifically spiritual based, but was all kinds of books for the state of Tennessee. So it was important to me to try and make that bridge, and all the books that are brought to the show can be inserted anywhere in the cell. I kind of like the idea that the show can change with a little audience participation. And then the books will all get donated to this organization. Inmates from all over those Appalachian states write in and they request different types of books. And then they have this big library from the donations that they can go in, pull from, and they ship 5 books to the incarcerated individual for free. So that's something that I thought would be kind of unique. I've never done anything like that before. So I hope, you know, that is something of interest to all of you guys. So that's sort of my long-winded, meandering story about Black as the Day, Black as the Night. And I've left it on this loop so that I could just be a little more free and focus on what I want to say. But if I wanted to pause before going on to anything else, because there's another project that I'm about to show you. So if anybody has any questions, I'm maybe breaking the formal aspect of how this is normally done. But I figured otherwise it's going to be a little hard to remember back to things. But is that all right? Yeah?
I have a question up here.
Yeah.
Have you made contact with the man who was released since he was released?
I contacted his lawyer because I don't have a way to contact him. And I don't know where he is. He was from Mexico, and so that's one thing that blows my mind. U.S. tax dollars and California tax dollars kept a citizen of Mexico imprisoned for 22 years, which is pretty mind-blowing. But the last time I heard, he was in, He was in the custody of immigration. So I don't know if he ended up back in Mexico or if he's in some weird limbo right now. But yeah.
Two questions, sort of. First, what did you write to the prisoners in the first letters? Like, were they weird? Did they feel weird about being included in this project? Like, how did they feel about that? And then two, could you say anything about the goodbye letter from the executed man?
That letter is actually in the show, so you can read it. It's one of the only full letters that I've ever included in the project, and I just felt like I had to because it was a pretty profound thing to get in the mail. But in terms of the first letter, I introduced myself. I said I'm a photographer and artist living in New York. I'm interested in working with you collaboratively. I would love to ask you some questions and maybe we can make some work together. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I left it really loose because I honestly didn't know if it would just be a writing piece, like a written dialogue back and forth. I didn't know if I was going to make work out of it for quite a while. And then the imagery just kind of got a little bit saturated in my head, and so as an artist, I just started making work out of it. But yeah, the original letter was pretty simple. I kept it really short because I didn't want to weird people out. I said, if you're interested in this, then write back, and if you're not, you know, I totally understand. And there was a few people that never wrote me back, so I don't know if they never got it or if they just didn't want to be a part of it. The first letter, the very first letter that I sent was to a guy in Texas, and I sent the letter to him. I sent a few letters after that, and then I went to Europe for a couple weeks because I had a show there. So I was gone, and I was kind of curious, you know. I was a little bit distracted by travel, but it was kind of in the back of my mind. I wonder if I got any letters. And then I got back home, checked the P.O. box, and there's a letter from this guy in Texas. And it was pretty surreal because it was like the project started immediately in terms of like I'm in, you know, like now I'm following through with this. Where before I had all this wavering, looking at the website, who do I want to write, like what do I want to do? But I wrote this guy and he wrote me back, and his letter literally just said, it kept it really short because he wasn't sure if I was going to get it. And he said, I pray that this letter gets to you. I don't remember exactly how he worded it, but the gist was, I'm a dying man. I have an execution date. I do not know if you're going to want to write me anymore. And then he said, I'm going to keep it very short because I don't even know that you'll get this letter. If you get this letter and you write me back, then we can go from there. But it was a very, like, punch to the gut. Literally the very first letter I got from anyone in the project was from that guy. So, and then, did I answer your second question? Okay. Sometimes I get a little lost in thought.
And if you want to talk about the construction of the landscapes, how you created.
Yeah, sure. So the landscapes, they kind of trickled in over time. I didn't make them all at the same time because I kind of had to wait for the right moment to feel inspired. Will you? I don't know if that's the right word for me right now, but some of them were having these kind of reoccurring things they were talking about, and these homesick images they were sort of painting for me in their letters about places from their past or things of significance. And so the way that I work is it's very spontaneous. And so I found myself just digging around in Google image searches, looking for these places that these people were describing and wondering, is this what it looked like? I don't know, like maybe this is what it looked like. And I started just compiling all of these images that sort of fit this like parameter of what they were talking about. So like one of them talked about the ocean and how when he was a small kid, he has this really strong memory of the tide was super low. He walked way out into the water. And when he looked ahead, he realized how far out he was. And when he looked behind, he saw how far he was from his family. And he got like really terrified. He said that he was kind of paralyzed standing in the water. And he had kind of talked a lot about that in other, not that exact memory, but that idea of the ocean in other letters. And so I wanted to create this sort of open water seascape that is a little bit daunting, but it's also a little bit peaceful or serene. And so I would collect these ocean, you know, horizon line over the ocean, kind of a generic picture that everyone takes, no matter, you know, anyone that goes to anywhere with the beach, we all take that picture. So I just kept collecting them, and then in every case it's the same, but since I'm already talking about that one, what I would do is I would take the image of the sea, and then I would take an additional image of the sea in a low opacity and almost like paint stroke. I would start layering and building these landscapes that didn't really exist because they were made out of a lot of different images from all over of the same topic, but from different places all over the world. And so that layering process was representative of their sentence and different chapters of their sentence. So each of them got edited down quite a bit. Just as an artist, I made my own like aesthetic decisions for some things, but I narrowed those years down. So some, like the ocean, it's 26 landscapes involved because he had been in prison for 26 years at that point. And there was a different representational photo for every single year that was passing, and they just keep building on themselves until it just gets super murky and kind of lost. And so I plucked 3 for my book. There's 2 in the show, but that's how they're layered files based off of kind of the duration of their sentence and things that are important to them to kind of create this muddled fictional landscape. So, and their portraits were the ones that a relative or a friend had put on the pen pal site. So that was the only picture I had of most of them, and I created a few different layers to manipulate in 2 different ways. It was basically a ratio of years alive, and out of that, how many years were spent in prison. So the older they were, the more of those years were consumed by prison years, the more distorted their image got. They're kind of hard to tell apart, but there's these micro level changes that occur. A lot of their sentences were pretty similar too, so, but yeah, that's how those were constructed.
Where did you get all of these texts from? The white on black, backwards. The black on white quotes that keep fluttering by?
Also the other ones that are just waiting for text.
There's 2, so the black on white, those are kind of like bookmarks that are talking about each of the men in terms of, they're just different quotes from each of them, from their letters. The black on black text pieces that are impossible to read, that says, "Take flight, my soul away." It shows perfectly here, but not up there. And then you kind of see it on the transition. But the guy that I wrote with the longest, that was in solitary confinement, he wrote a poem called "Black as the Day, Black as the Night." And it was this beautiful poem about being in isolation. And so I plucked different lines out of it to construct those black on black text pieces. So some of them, all of the quotes on white are from 7 different individuals. And then there's different documents like that I found online. That's my pen pal in Mississippi, his final appeal that had been denied. So it's like the letter they sent back being like, "Nope, like we're stamping this, like we're good. We're gonna go through with this execution." So, yeah.
How much of their cases did you know before writing to each of them?
The only one that I couldn't find anything for was this guy at San Quentin. For some reason, I knew what he was there for in a very generic sense. I knew that to be on death row in California, it has to be for capital murder, but I didn't know what he did. And I had tried to find that out because it is something that I was interested in knowing about. All of the other guys, some of them I got really involved in their cases because there were a lot of appeals they had filed, so you could find a lot of information. You can go online and read all of the court documentation. And I found some of that completely fascinating, just to read like the witnesses coming up and the different stuff going on in the trial. The guy that I wrote with in Mississippi that was executed, his case was completely like a whodunit, no witnesses, 2 people pointing at each other, and then someone that was dead. And so it was a small town, and I don't know the politics behind what happened, but he always maintained his innocence, and the other man that was there was the victim's husband. They had 2 kids together, and I've read a lot about how the jury had sympathized with that individual, with the kids, and I can see that. That would be very troubling when you're sitting on a jury panel. But yeah, some of them I got to read quite a lot about, and then some of them I never really got to know too much about. And a lot of them don't like to talk about their cases in letters because, especially if they're filing appeals or trying to get out of prison, they don't want to talk about their cases that could be used against them. So the ones that I didn't know about, I didn't get to ask about either. So I don't know. I did not. I thought, for one thing, part of the my intrigue with the project was this idea of old-fashioned letter writing and that process and what that creates. None of them asked what I looked like. And I thought that that was a really genuine space to come from, because for me, like, I, as a portrait photographer, would probably want to know, hey, what do you look like? Send me a picture. And I just felt like that. First, none of the prisons were anywhere near me. I was living in New York when I started it, and they were in Texas, Mississippi, Georgia, California, Nevada, Idaho. And so there was nothing really close to me. And then the second thing is, like, a lot of them they had like extremely limited visitation rights. And so even when the idea crossed my mind, especially with the guy in Mississippi, there was a lot of restrictions surrounding that. And I just felt like it would change a lot of the dynamics of the project and shift the intention, or not the intention, but shift maybe the attention that was being within the project. So I thought about it. When I moved from New York to Portland, Oregon, and Crescent City is where Pelican Bay is. That's pretty close to Oregon. And I really thought about it, but I felt like it would change everything, and so I just kind of it's very much so. They're not even permitted phone calls, so yeah, it would have been tough.
Question over here.
Was there anybody reading the letters or coming and going from the prisons?
Yeah, on their side, all the time. Yeah, some of the letters, especially the guy in Pelican Bay, there's a stamp on every single sheet of paper, on the envelope. It's in my book more than I get to show in exhibition, but most of the envelopes have already been cut open, taped back together. And I don't know what mine going to them ever looked like, but that's what theirs coming to me looked like. A lot of different prison screening. There would be stamps that were warning, like, you know, like it is your responsibility, you're choosing to interact with an incarcerated individual. So there was a lot of, like, yeah, kind of filter. I don't even know if they always got all my letters. There was a few times where I would write and not hear back for months, and then I would write again and be like, oh, are you okay? The guy in Pelican Bay, he disappeared for a while. And it really worried me. Excuse me. It really worried me because of the nature of his cell. Like, he was in a 6x9 cell with no windows, 22 and a half hours a day. Then he'd go to this rec yard that had no windows for an hour by himself. So I was kind of a little bit concerned about him when I didn't hear from him for a while. And then I felt really bad because when he surfaced, like maybe 6 months later, he sent one postcard that said, you know, sorry for my absence. I couldn't, as embarrassing as it is, I couldn't meet my postage. And then he sent another one that kind of explained a little more that his mom in Mexico had passed away and that he didn't feel up to writing anyone. And so, yeah, that always, I don't know, that made me feel pretty sad for, I don't know what that experience must be like. But
Sarah, would you ever do this again, but with women?
What's that?
Would you ever do this piece all over again, but with women, and do you think it would be a different outcome?
I probably would, because it opened up a lot of just intrigue about mass incarceration and a lot of this stuff. But honestly, I don't know if I have it in me to do another project like this. It went on for so long. Yeah. It's kind of funny because I wrapped it up in 2014, and it just keeps living on. It's been traveling as an exhibition for the last year. So it went from Aperture Gallery in New York straight to Houston Center for Photography, and then straight to the Wignall Museum in California, and then it came pretty much straight out here. So it's just been kind of touring and taking a life of its own. So I have been so caught up in doing that as an artist, because I don't have a big Ed Ruscha studio with all my assistants. So I get so caught up doing that it really holds me back from making new work. And that's been affecting me. So I've been excited to make new work.
Is the experience of being a pen pal to a prisoner something that you would recommend after doing this project?
Honestly, I think so. You know, like the website even that I went on, there's all these warnings, and like you have to click in, agree to terms, and there's like probably some liability involved. So with anybody that's ever interested in doing something like this, I would say to get a P.O. box. There's a lot of different guidelines they give you on the websites that talk about things to share and things not to share, how personal to get. And so I think the thing that I found the most striking and surprising is that, and I've always loved writing, and I've always loved reading, so maybe it just really brought that back out of me. I had kind of forgotten about it. But when I was living in New York and I was getting these letters, it made me look at everything very differently, because I'm thinking about it as I'm walking through like Manhattan on a snowy day. I'm thinking, how would I describe this to someone that can't see it? And so it was almost like my brain was like constantly in that like journaling mode where you're thinking about things more poetically than you usually do. And so I was always kind of thinking that way. And so in a lot of ways, it made me extremely appreciative and aware of my surroundings in a way that I probably was taking for granted previously. And I think that's something that comes out of, you know, that experience of writing people that don't have the same capacity to see the world. So in that regard, I think it's a pretty enriching experience. I don't know if it's for everyone, but that's what I got out of it. Shall I move on to the next project? When we were doing the testing for the projector, it dawned on me, it's not that the images are pixelated, but the projector itself is pixelated. So all these images that I had high hopes you'd be able to read are completely impossible to read. So so I don't know how long we should spend looking at them. That's something that I'll spontaneously have to deal with. So this is parting words. While all those letters were going around for all those years, within, as I said, the first couple months, this guy that I wrote with was executed, and he was in the state of Texas. So I went on the Texas, you can go on the Texas Criminal, it's called the Texas Department of Criminal Justice website, and they have all these different like categories that you can go into. You can look on information about death row. Once you click into that, you can see a list of everyone on death row currently, everyone that's already been executed, everyone's scheduled for executions coming up, and just different facts and stats facts about their particular death row. So when I went on there, I found this basically an execution archive, and they keep it really tidy. So you could go in and you could view every single person that had been executed. You could view their mugshot. You could read details about each person, like their age, their race, their gender, their education level, their height, their body weight. And you could read a summary of the crime they had committed. And then in a separate column, you could click in, and then that's where they had their last statement. And the information was in chronological order, starting from the first execution that took place since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. And they updated it pretty quickly after each execution that took place. At the time I discovered the information, it was in 2009. There were 441 people on the list. The 441st person was the guy that I was writing with. That was in 2009. And currently, just trying to update for the show installation here, there was 531 when me and Ruth talked about the idea of doing the entire installation scope. And then by the time I came out here, I think the number had grown a few more. So between 2009 and now, there's been nearly 100 people executed in Texas, and several, you know, that, like I said, most of the stuff, like I'm getting into it, and then I'm realizing there's more questions I have, so I start researching. So I start looking at this website, but then through the process of working on this project, someone will hand me an article and be like, did you see this? Or have you heard about this guy? And so several of the people that I was looking at their last statements, I found out later that they were found innocent after they were executed. There was at least 3 of them in Texas. So I wrote down what I found about well, not what I found, all the stuff, but I wrote down, so there's a guy named Carlos de Luna. His last statement was, I want to say I hold no grudges, I hate no one, I love my family, tell everyone on death row to keep the faith and don't give up. That guy was, I saw him in a documentary where the guy that actually had committed the murder that he was convicted of was walking around bragging about it. He told numerous people, like, that fool is on death row and I did this, and was kind of like, thought it was really funny, and no one ever listened to him. And the guy that, Carlos de Luna, was saying, I'm an innocent man, and no one was listening to him, and it was only discovered after his execution. They were like, oh, he wasn't lying, he was an innocent man, and the guy confessing his crime over and over again was telling the truth as well. Then Gary Graham, he says, we will prevail, we may lose this battle, but we will win this war. This death, this lynching will be avenged. It will be avenged. It must be avenged. The people must avenge this murder. They are killing me tonight. They are murdering me tonight. That's a man that they found innocent after he was executed. And then the most recent is probably the most troubling story that I read while doing any of this work. His name is Cameron Todd Willingham. He was convicted of arson, and he was convicted of killing his 3 small children in a fire that they said that he purposefully set. And when you read the story, I think it was in the New Yorker, they were all taking a nap in the middle of the day, and he woke up to smoke. He crawled down the hallway because it was really overpowering. He opened his children's bedroom, and the smoke blew out at him to where he started suffocating, and he had to exit. When he climbed down the stairs to his bottom floor and opened the front door, it created a flash fire which shot flames through his entire house. And so he was outside trying to get help, and his 3 small children were inside. All of his neighbors testified that he came out by himself, that he didn't even try, and he was immediately a suspect. It was not seen as an accidental fire in any way, and he maintained his innocence over and over again saying, and it was tragic because he lost his 3 children. And his wife stood by him for quite a while, and then she grew kind of tired, and she ended up leaving him. And then he stayed on death row, I think, for about, 15, 12 years. And then he was executed, but this woman that he wrote with that was a pen pal, she just was determined to look into it. And she was just really torn up about it, and she had the funds to do so, so she hired forensic fire specialists to go in and investigate this fire and see what might have happened. And these fire specialists, they had these old houses that they could do these fires on, and they went in and they reenacted the whole thing, and when they opened the front door, the flash fire went through the house. It created a pattern on the wall of flames, exactly the same as what happened in this guy's case. And the pattern on the wall looked like gasoline had been poured. And so when they arrested him, they said, oh, you poured gasoline down the halls, all over the carpet. They even went as far to say is that he painted a pentagram on his children's bedroom floor with gasoline that was lit on fire. And this was all proven completely ridiculous by these forensic fire scientists that were able to go in and be like, no, we can recreate this, not just once, but twice, 3, as many times as you want us to do this. But his last statement says, yes, the only statement I want to make is that I'm an innocent man, convicted of a crime I did not commit. I have been persecuted for 12 years for something I did not do. From God's dust I came, to dust I will return, so the earth shall become my throne. I gotta go, road dog. I love you, Gabby. And the remaining, it's in brackets, it says remaining portion of the statement was omitted due to profanity. So there were some that I didn't change the way that they were documented, because sometimes the person that was in charge of maybe dictating, documenting, they would write exactly what happened. So some of them would say, muttered quietly, stopped talking, and mouthed, I love you, to the witness window. And just really eerie things where there wasn't an actual last statement, but the person recording it took the time to document that type of movement. So, but anyhow, so I kept looking through all these last statements when I came across the website. Many of them just had a super profound impact on me. And I thought about it in this idea of we rarely ever get to hear the words of somebody facing immediate death. And there's something really profound about that. The statements that I read while combing through the website ranged from expressing fear and sorrow to expressing remorse and hatred. Some said nothing at all, and then some maintained their innocence. And most of them, majority of the statements I found were spiritual, and a lot of them were prayers. So like the original website with Black as the Day, the pen pal website that I kept going back to again and again, suddenly, while working on Black as the Day, Black as the Night, I find this website and I keep going back to it again and again and again until I became really interested in doing something with the material. But I was conflicted how as an artist I wanted to proceed. So it just kind of started a little bit organically. I started making these sort of charcoal drawings of the last text, and then that wasn't really it. And then I started doing sort of these white on white text fields, and that wasn't really it. But there was just this profound haunting feeling that there's something to this, and there's something really interesting about the act of a last statement, but then also the heaviness of why they're making them. And so I just started jotting a lot of them down, and you can't really read these at all, so I'm just going to read a few that stood out to me. There's one. So I came in as a lion, and I come out as peaceful as a lamb. Another one, my heart is going ba-bump, ba-bump, ba-bump. Another one, I am innocent, innocent, innocent. Another one, more religious in tone, nothing shall I fear. There's one that says, I'm going to a beautiful place. And then there's some longer ones that to me were just like striking. So one says, even though I lay on this gurney seconds away from my death, I am at total peace. I feel it. I'm going to sleep now. Good night. 1, 2, there it goes. And the person that wrote it just left like dots as if like it wasn't a complete thought. Another one says, the road goes on forever. Me and you, all of us. I can feel it now. All I can give you, all I will give you. The love we all share couldn't be more beautiful. Another one says, why does my heart ache? The walls of darkness are crushing in on me. Life without meaning is life without purpose. If we live to the Lord. If we die to the Lord. And then this one's really long. It's kind of fragmented, but I'm thinking about this guy laying there, and it's not scripted. He's not laying there with a piece of paper. It says, approach the present. Love is the only thing for us. There is no closure without love. Our love is just like the nectar of God. We have so much to give when we give out of our hearts. The heart is the wishing well that waters the tree. I wish and desire one thing. There is no separation between you and me. Hold me in yours and carry me home. So there I was just reading statement after statement, which in turn led me to read crime after crime. And it was a really dark place to be, as if the other project wasn't already dark enough. And I started, just pulling these quotes and thinking about it and not knowing what to do with it. And eventually, I came across this like crappy software. I was thinking of like Mosaic, like those softwares that turn like a million photos into one photo. And I'm thinking like, there's got to be some crappy software that's meant to turn a photograph into text. And it took a while, but I found one, and I'm surprised they never shut their website down when they found that I was probably the only one using it. But I found this website where I could import the photo, I could import the text, and then that was all I could control, and it would create these patterns based off of their sentence structures. And the contrast is based off of how good or poor their original mugshot was. So there's a lot of factors that I had no control over. And then it's text-based. It's converted the picture entirely to text. So there's problems with how to print it, because inkjet is horrible with text. And so I had to figure that out. And it turns out to be one of the most lo-fi projects I've ever done. I can only have this printed on crappy laser printers at like office supply places. So I've done it at Kinko's and Office Depot. And I've tried it other ways that are more glamorous, and it doesn't work. But yeah, so when I found the software to use, I thought, okay, I'm on to something, but if I'm going to do this at all, I have to do it for all of them. And so that was a bit of a daunting task. The first thing I did was to go through and download each of their mugshots, write details so that I could figure out the chronological order of them with their names and everything, and then go through again with their last statements and go and cut and paste. There's this huge document that's in chronological order that matches the number that I had saved for them, because the way that I numbered them wasn't necessarily their inmate number or anything. It was the chronological order of their number on the death row roster. So it would say like number 531 is, and it had their name, and they were the 531st execution in Texas. So it was a lot of work to just compile the information. And it took me years to complete. And I remember I was in a crit group in New York, and they're like, Amy, you're like, these are crazy. And you're pretty crazy. You're kind of freaking me out. But they're amazing. You have to keep doing them. And so I did. But yeah, it took me years to complete. for one thing, the website was always getting updated. Like, I couldn't keep up with it. And then for another thing, it was just like one of the most depressing projects you could possibly work on, because not only do you get swept up in their last statements, which some of them are kind of scary and some of them, but most of them are just like profoundly sad. But then you get swept up in looking at their crimes, and then you just get swept up in how dark everything might be, like in the world. And so it just kind of took a hold of me. So I had to kind of take a lot of breaks from it. In fact, I think I took a whole year off from it at one point. And then it wasn't until, the Aperture show, I really dug back into it, because we did a big grid of 150 for that show. And then at Houston, they said, well, we have even more room, so how about like 250? And then when I started talking with Ruth about this show, I was thinking, like, if I have the ability to, and you have the space to, I want to show all of them. And that was something that she agreed was super important. And so I had to go in and actually make the last year, because I had kind of let it rest for a while. So the Cress exhibition has all 531 up. It took us, like 2.5 days with a team of people? I don't remember. It was a very intense installation, but I'm very pleased with it. And I hope that everyone gets to spend some time with it, because it's pretty captivating. You can go and just go one by one, row by row, and kind of, in fact, when we were kind of rushing around today, we had done the 2 different class talks, and then this like swarm of bees, this French 8th grade exchange class. There was so many of them, and they just ran in the gallery space, and they just were like swarming around. They speaking like just French chatter, like teenage chatter, but all in French, and they just like swept through the gallery really fast. They all jammed into the solitary confinement, so I have a picture. There's like 30 of them in there. And then they all ran out, and I was like, what are these kids doing? Because they didn't talk to us at all. It was like they knew what to do. They just ran around and got into everything. And then they slowly came around, and the woman that was with them, the French woman was with them, says, are you the artist? I said, yeah. And she goes, what is this show? So then I'm like, okay, this is where it's going to be sort of, like, sorry to be dark with your 8th grade class. So I'm like, oh, she goes, what are all these mug shots? And I say, oh, they're actually all executed men in the state of Texas. And she's just like, I have to tell them. And I'm thinking, like, oh, they're going to all leave immediately. So she goes and she tells them, and she's talking in French, so I'm just standing there, I don't know what's going on. And then all the kids just go, they spread out, and they like glue to the wall. And they're all reading them. And then one kid comes up, and he starts speaking in French, kind of with this like scowl on his face. And he's pointing, and he's like saying something in French. And she turns to me, and she says, why does this man have no face? Because there's a few that don't have faces. They were never recorded, as far as I could ever find in any book or online. And so I tell him that, and then he just gets all fired up, and he's like speaking in French, and he's pointing to the wall, and then all the kids go and glue back to the wall. And it was like it was really weird to witness it. Just this giant group of kids from another country just totally absorbed in it. And we just were cracking up, me and Ruth. We just stood back kind of like, as long as they're not touching anything, because they were kind of, like, the best way I can describe it, and maybe you'll agree, is like they were like a swarm of, like a flock of birds or something. They just all came like a mob around, and then just, I don't know. But anyways, it was very entertaining. And so I think that's what's kind of interesting. I've gotten to show this work at Aperture. I've gotten to show it at HCP, which was a little scary for me, to be honest. I got off the plane in Houston. There's these big signs on the side of the freeway that say, this area is under the watch of Sheriff so-and-so. It's very like big dog, like lots of police action, a lot of government. I don't know. So I just was like, this is like worst idea. What am I doing in Texas showing this work? I'm going to get my work. Someone's going to walk in the gallery and key it or destroy it or burn the gallery. I don't know. But it was well received. It was kind of nice. And then I showed a big grid of the work at Manifest Justice, which was a pop-up show that went on for, I think it was 2 weeks in downtown, well, not downtown LA, in Baldwin Heights. And it was sponsored by Amnesty International, and it was the whole thing. That was the first show where they're like, artist as activist. And I'm standing in the show. It was actually pretty weird, and this speaks a little bit about how people see gender. I walk into the opening, and I'm with my big, tall friend who looks real manly and has a briefcase. He looks very professional. And I'm dressed up, but I'm just, I don't know, I look younger than I am. We walk in together, and this Amnesty film crew immediately goes to him, and they say, oh, do you have any work in the show? And he goes, yeah, I got this piece over here. And so they're talking to him for a while, and then they like keep looking over me, and they're like, do you know anyone else? And then he finally goes, well, she does. And they're like, oh, you do? Like, is it down here? Like, it was kind of condescending, and I'm thinking like, yeah, it's a pretty big piece. I'll show you, let's go around the corner. And we walk out of this room, and it was like the centerpiece of the room because it was about, like 150 or 200 of these mugshots. And they're like, that's your work? I'm like, yeah, you jerks. Like, kind of like totally dismissed me like 5 times. I had to like drag you over to it. And then as soon as they knew that, all of a sudden, Amnesty brought a film crew in, Manifest Justice brought a film crew in, this weird audience formed around me, and my friend Peter was like, what just happened? And then they're asking me all these like hardcore questions about like, when did the death penalty get reinstated? This like, all these like really like, just like hardcore facts where I feel like I'm an artist, I try to be as informed as I can, but I was definitely like feeling very challenged in that situation. But it was cool because it was Amnesty International, and it was the entire organization, and then they said, be in touch with us. And then like a month later, they invited me to this private brunch in like Topanga Hills, where the president of Amnesty International had flown in from Washington, D.C. to talk to the LA chapter about their different things that they're going over. And their biggest campaign right now is abolishing the death penalty. And so they invited me as an artist just to talk about my work. But it's kind of interesting where things go. And you're just working in your little studio or your little apartment, not really knowing how big it'll grow or if it'll belly flop. So, but that's what I have here, and I'm glad Ruth was ambitious to bring it in.